Hamish, Macbeth, and the body found behind the Tattie shed. A body is discovered behind the Tattie shed in Loch Dhu, turning an ordinary corner of the village into the centre of quiet shock. Hamish Macbeth soon learns that even familiar places can hide deadly secrets. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? And if you enjoy settling into these Highland mysteries, subscribe and make this part of your nightly ritual. Only 11% are subscribed while 89% aren't. Your support truly means a lot. Hamish had woken with the dull feeling that the day was already spoiled, though nothing had happened yet. The grey light over Loch Dhu looked tired. Lugs was restless, pouring at the door as if he smelled trouble. Trouble arrived in the form of Mary McLean banging on the station door and saying there was a smell behind their Tattie shed, and Angus was away and she couldn't stand it any longer. Hamish followed her up the track. The mud sucked at his boots. Lugs kept stopping and staring at the shed as if it offended him personally. Mary hung back, fiddling with her apron as though she might twist it into rope. "I told Angus to see to it," she said, "but he's got his own ideas about priorities." Hamish expected a dead sheep, maybe a fox dragged into the sacks. The shed leaned to one side like it was sick of being a shed at all. When he pulled the door, it groaned and stuck. Lugs whined. The smell rolled out. It was not a sheep. Mary let out a thin noise that might have been a prayer or a curse. Behind the stacked sacks lay a man, half under a filthy tarpaulin. One arm stuck out with a strange twist, and one expensive brown brogue remained on the foot. The sort of shoe Hamish had only seen on businessmen who came north and pretended to like the weather. Hamish's stomach dropped, though he kept his face as straight as he could. "Who's been at this shed?" he asked. Mary shook her head and said no one touched it but Angus. She looked as if she wished she had never been born. Lugs sniffed, then backed off sharply, tail down. Hamish stepped inside, careful on the damp boards. The man had been dead long enough to look like he belonged there, but the shoe said he did not. A bit of blue cloth fluttered on a nail by the door, caught there like a careless signal. Hamish pinched it free. Cheap wool, women's scarf by the look of it. He slipped it in his pocket, already hearing Blair sneer about knitting clues. He told Mary as gently as he could to keep everyone away. But Mary's cousin had already run up to the house and was on the landline, talking loudly enough that half Loch Dhu soon trudged up the track to stare. They gathered by the fence, people whispering as if Hamish had laid the corpse there himself. Blair arrived like a storm that had got drunk on its way over. He and Anderson skidded to a stop in a spray of gravel. Blair's face was red before he opened his mouth. "Secure the scene, Macbeth. Ever heard of that? Or do you think your wee village rules mean you can let gawkers poke at a murder corpse?" "No one poked anything," Hamish said. It came out weakly. He hated that. Blair was already marching to the shed, Anderson yapping at his heels. The villagers pressed in, pretending interest in the mud while craning their necks toward the shed. Mary snapped at them to show some decency, which only made them whisper more. Someone muttered that such things happened when crofts were neglected. Another said this was what came of strangers buying up estates. Hamish caught only fragments. Killed for his money. Travellers. Something to do with the subsidies. In Loch Dhu, truth was always the last guess anyone made. Blair came back out of the shed, holding a handkerchief to his nose as if he were too fine for any of it. "Body's been moved," he declared. "Even you should see that, Macbeth. Your crofter's hiding something." "It's Angus's shed," Hamish said. "It doesn't mean it's Angus's body." Blair gave him a long, mocking look. "Still protecting your wee friends. You never learn." Anderson nodded eagerly, though his gaze kept drifting to Lugs, who was growling low at him for no reason Hamish could see, except the dog had good judgment. Hamish crouched again near the door, ignoring Blair's huffs. The blue cloth had been torn, not cut. Someone had left in a hurry. Village rubbish, Blair had called it. But Loch Dhu women wore scarves the way the rest of Scotland wore common sense. It meant something, though Hamish could not yet say what. By noon the wind had risen, sending a sour mixture of seaweed and peat smoke over the crofts. More villagers arrived, saying they had come to see if Mary needed anything. They lingered, staring, judging. Someone had already said aloud that Angus must have done something terrible for a body to land on his land. By the time Angus returned from wherever he had gone, his name would be Mud. Hamish walked a little apart, not thinking about the case so much as wishing Blair would fall into a ditch. He had seen enough murders. But one on croft land, with villagers ready to believe the worst of each other, felt different. Worse. The man in the shed did not look like he had died where he lay, and no crofter would leave a shoe like that untouched. Someone had dragged him here, someone who wanted Lochdu to look guilty. Blair shouted again, summoning Hamish as if he were a lazy dog. "You get statements," he barked, "and don't lose them this time." Hamish swallowed the irritation. He turned to the villagers, but even the friendlier faces avoided his eyes. They wanted answers, but also wanted him to fail. Lochdu liked its gossip tidy and its deaths far away. Mary wiped her eyes with her apron. "Angus will be wild," she whispered. "Folk saying this and that, as if we don't have enough trouble." Hamish wanted to say something kind, but could not think of anything that wouldn't sound false. He patted Luggs instead, though Luggs only trembled, staring at the shed. Hamish watched the Strathbane men fuss with their equipment and felt the familiar, sinking knowledge that he had already lost control of the case. The villagers were whispering the wrong things. Blair was shouting the wrong things. Hamish himself had missed something, though he could not say what. Only the blue scrap in his pocket felt real. When the crowd drifted off, leaving trampled mud and a lingering stench, Hamish stood alone by the shed. The door hung half open, as if the dead man were waiting for someone to come back. He would have to tell Angus what had happened on his land. Angus would rage, the village would rage, Daviot would rage too once Blair blamed Hamish for the mess. Luggs nudged his knee, wanting to leave. Hamish shut the shed door. It thudded like a warning. Lochdu had been quiet for weeks. It would not be quiet again for a long time. Hamish was already in a foul mood when the doctor closed the surgery door behind them and said the man from the Tattie shed had taken a single heavy blow to the back of the head. "He would have dropped at once," the doctor went on, "but that doesn't mean he died instantly. He could have been unconscious a while." Hamish thanked him and left quickly, not wanting to hear more. The morning light looked even greyer. He felt the familiar dread of knowing Strathbane would now sniff around Lochdu, trampling crofts and pride with equal enthusiasm. Back at the station he struggled with the old computer. It whirred and clicked like a dying kettle. Anderson hovered, breathing noisily. Hamish found a wallet photo and a few cards from the dead man. The name was Rory Sinclair, a land agent, a factor. Hamish sighed. Land agents were trouble who spoke politely. Factors were worse. They pretended to be helpful while arranging ruin. "He's worked for some of the estates up north," Anderson said, peering over his shoulder. "Maybe he was here for business." "Maybe," Hamish said, though he did not care for the speculation. The computer refused to load a file, so he jabbed at the keys until it gave up something thin and useless. Rory Sinclair, Edinburgh address, a note about consultancy. Nothing that told him why the man had ended behind Angus's Tattie shed. Hamish went out before he put his fist through the screen. He took Luggs down to Patel's shop. Patel was stacking tins with the solemnity of a priest. He looked up sharply when Hamish entered. "Aye, Sergeant, I heard." Patel's voice was low. "Folk are nervous. A body on croft land. It will not sit well." "Did you see him?" Hamish asked. Patel nodded. "He came in twice, never smiled, wanted to know who owned which croft and how long they'd held them, asking about boundaries, that sort of man." Hamish thanked him and was turning to leave when two fishers at the counter exchanged glances. One cleared his throat. "He was in the Tommel Castle Hotel bar," the man said. "Arguing." "With who?" Hamish asked. The man shrugged. "Just arguing. You ken how folk are." "That's no an answer." The other fisher lifted a bag of coal as if shielding himself. "You wouldn't expect who it was," he muttered. Hamish waited. They both stared at him with pious innocence, as though he had insulted them by asking. He left them to it. Folk in Lochdu liked to hint at secrets, not share them. By mid-afternoon he had grown irritated enough to grab at the easiest explanation. He must have got drunk, walked out the wrong way and been clobbered by some stranger, he told Anderson. Dumped him behind the shed. Anderson blinked. "You're sure?" "No," Hamish said, "but Blair will be." It was a weak theory, but it gave the Strathbane men something simple to cling to. Hamish felt vaguely ashamed even as he said it. He was letting the village have its tidy story. A stranger did it. Dumped him. Nothing to do with Lochdu. Everyone could keep their grudges without consequence. He went back to the Tattie shed because the shame nagged at him. The ground was churned, the mud slapped into odd patterns. Angus's tractor left a wide, familiar tread, but these tracks were narrower. A different vehicle had been there. Someone had reversed close to the shed door. Hamish crouched. Luggs stayed a step back, nose twitching. There was also a smear of blood on the wood. Thin, sharp, as if the man had been dragged. Hamish touched it with one finger, then wiped it on the grass. Sinclair had not died there. The shed was only where someone wanted him found. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Blair said behind him. Hamish straightened too fast and hit his head on the doorframe. Blair smirked. Anderson pretended not to see. "You poking about again," Blair said. "This is straightforward. The man was a factor. Folk hate factors. Your crofter had reason." "Angus Didney," Hamish began. Blair cut him off. "You always defend these villagers, always, till the evidence knocks you flat." He pointed at the churned mud. "That's where he dragged the body. Angus. Who else?" Hamish wanted to say many people had reason. Many people had vehicles. Many people had tempers. But the villagers stood nearby, pretending to look at clouds while listening to every word. He felt their eyes on him, waiting to see whom he'd back, whom he'd betray. He swallowed the instinct to argue. Blair took his silence as victory. "Good," Blair said. "We'll get this wrapped up." Wrapped up, as if Angus had already been named the killer. The idea slid through Lochdu with the weight of fog. Hamish saw it settle on faces. Mary's tight mouth, the fishers whispering, someone muttering that Angus always had a temper, someone else saying he'd been behind in payments. Little things people remembered when it suited them. Luggs pressed against Hamish's leg, uneasy. A bit of scarf fluttered against Hamish's pocket, reminding him of the blue cloth he had taken earlier. He kept his hand on it, though he did not show it to Blair. Not yet. The rain started up again, thin and cold. Blair barked orders no one cared about. Anderson fussed with a notebook, writing nothing useful. Hamish watched the villagers turn away, already forming their own version of the truth. A factor had come north. A crofter had lost patience. That was all they needed. Hamish stood there until the last of them drifted off. Then he shut the shed door, though it made no difference. The trouble was out now, and the truth, whatever it was, would not stay buried. But he had already made the mistake of giving Blair an easy story. Lochdu liked easy stories, especially when they blamed someone else. He walked back toward the station with Luggs close at heel. There was still mud on his hand. He rubbed it on the grass again, though the stain remained. Blair was already roaring before Hamish had shut the McLean's kitchen door. The place smelled of tea gone cold and damp wool, and the lino was so clean it shone. Blair marched straight across it with muddy boots, leaving fat brown prints as if he meant to mark his territory. Mary winced but said nothing. Angus stood stiffly by the stove, arms folded, jaw stuck forward like a man refusing to bow even if pushed. "So, this is your crofter," Blair bellowed. "This is the man who thought he could hide a body behind his Tattie shed." Angus's eyes flashed. "My croft is being treated like a midden, and you tramping dirt all over my floor doesn't help." "Oh, we're worried about floors now," Blair jeered. "What about the man you killed?" Hamish opened his notebook, though he already knew Blair wouldn't let him use it. Angus had a face carved by years of wind and hard work, and right now every line looked like it had been hammered in deeper. Luggs, lying near the doorway, watched Blair with narrowed eyes, sensing the fight brewing. "Angus got a letter," Blair said triumphantly, stabbing a finger at the dresser. "A letter from that factor fellow. This Rory Sinclair, hinting his tenancy would be reviewed. That's motive enough." Hamish cleared his throat. "A lot of folk got letters. It doesn't make Angus a killer." Blair swung on him. "You're soft on your wee village shirkers, Macbeth. That's your trouble, always defending them." Angus looked at Hamish then, and the hurt in his eyes was sharp. Hamish felt it like a bad stone in his boot. He wasn't defending anyone well today. Blair rounded on Angus again. "Where were you on Tuesday night?" "On the hill with the sheep," Angus said. He shouldn't have said it so fast. Mary dropped a pan in the sink with a loud clang, and colour rose up her neck. Blair's eyes gleamed. "Try again," Blair said. Angus's shoulders sagged. "I was in Inverness, seeing a man about selling some stock." "Off the books," Blair added with joy, as if he had plucked it from the air. Angus glared at Mary, who looked ready to burst into tears. "I didn't want the neighbours knowing," he muttered. "That's deception," Blair announced. "Deception and motive." He turned to Anderson, who had been hiding behind him like a child hoping not to be noticed. "Cuff him." Angus was taken to Strathbane for questioning. Late the next day he was sent home again, no charge yet, only warnings and paperwork, until Blair found an excuse to come back for him. Lugs growled, a deep sound that made Anderson flinch. Blair snapped at the dog, which only made Lugs lift his lip farther. Hamish stepped between them before Blair did something stupid. "You're making a mistake," Hamish said. It sounded pathetic as soon as it left his mouth. He had meant to say it firmly, but Blair's presence always wrung the strength out of him. Angus stared at him with something worse than anger. "I thought you were on our side, Macbeth," he shouted, "but you're as bad as the rest." "I'm not," Hamish began, but Angus had already turned away, hands held out for the cuffs. Anderson snapped them on too tightly, earning another growl from Lugs. Blair strutted as if he had solved the whole case with one great sweep of genius. Outside, a few neighbours had gathered, pretending they were just passing. One woman nudged another, whispering loud enough that Hamish could hear every word. "They'll say all crofters are liars now. It'll stick." And another answered, "Aye, murderers too, if this keeps up." Hamish felt the village turning, shifting in that slow, poisonous way Lochdu excelled at. Folk who had spent years exchanging favours were now preparing explanations for why they'd never trusted Angus. Mary hurried out, apron still on, and saw the cuffs. "You've ruined us," she said to Hamish, though he'd not touched her husband. Blair strutted past Hamish as if he were a servant. "Bring the wife in next," he snapped, "and make sure Macbeth doesn't lose her on the way." Hamish clenched his teeth. A bit of mud near the shed had shown narrow boot prints earlier, with a slight drag to one foot. Someone who walked oddly or maybe carried something heavy. Angus had no such gait. Hamish had meant to tell Blair, but Blair swept by him toward the car, barking orders no one was listening to. Hamish looked at the villagers. No one met his eyes. Lugs pressed against his leg, anxious. The handcuffs clicked shut in the patrol car. Mary let out a strangled sound and fled back inside. Someone muttered that this was what came of letting the police get comfortable. Another said Angus had always been too proud. Hamish trudged after Blair, the boot prints nagging at him, but he said nothing. Not yet. Maybe not soon enough. Blair slammed the car door, pleased with himself. Hamish stood in the yard, watching the neighbours drift off to spread the gossip like seed thrown in the wind. He felt the whole place shift, uneasy and resentful. The wrong man had been chosen, and the right one, whoever that was somewhere watching. Lugs whined softly. Hamish patted the dog's head, though it did nothing to settle him. The quiet after Blair's departure felt worse than the shouting. The Kirk Hall was already too full when Hamish arrived, and the noise inside carried a sharp wrong note that made Lugs stop in the doorway. The dog gave a low whine. Hamish felt much the same. The meeting was supposed to be about subsidies, but the body behind Angus's Tattie shed had eaten the agenda like moths through cloth. Chairs scraped, coats steamed. Folk were pretending to sit calmly, but every head jerked at the sight of Hamish. A few nodded in that stiff, polite way that meant the opposite of welcome. He took a seat at the back. Lugs slid under the chair and lay flat, as if keeping low might save him from being blamed next. The minister flapped his notes on the podium. "Let us begin with a reminder that gossip helps no one," he said. The hall crackled. It always did when someone tried to stop gossip. Tam Fraser, a broad fisherman with a face like an angry moon, stood at once. "If they can drag Angus off his croft, they can drag any of us," he said. "The factor wasn't welcome here, right enough, but that's not murder." A younger crofter shot up, cheeks burning. If Angus hadn't lied about Tuesday night, folk might trust him more. "That's rich," someone else muttered, coming from a lad who borrowed Tam's trailer and never returned it. Another voice chimed in, louder. "We all ken who fiddles their forms. The subsidies dinna vanish by magic." The room burst into overlapping accusations. Old grudges bloomed like mould, boundary disputes, machinery lent and never seen again, cattle straying, sheep that mysteriously changed ownership. Hamish felt each word scraping at him, as if he had caused all of it simply by turning up with a badge. He tried to stand. If anyone saw Rory Sinclair the night before, no one let him finish. The minister flailed again. Please, this is not helpful." But his voice was drowned by a woman in the front row. "We're meant to trust the police when they hand our neighbour to Strathbane without a blink." "I didna hand him," Hamish began. "Aye, you did," another voice snapped. "You let Blair take him like a trophy." Hamish sat again. There was no room for explanations. Folk had already written their own. The door creaked and heads swung. Priscilla Halberton Smythe slipped in, shutting out the rain with a firm little movement. She wore tweed and a look that said she would rather be anywhere else. Even so, her presence stiffened backs and softened voices. The hotel mattered more to the village than the truth ever did. She made no fuss about finding a seat, but managed to look as though she were bringing order with her. Hamish felt a stab of discomfort. Priscilla had always made him aware of everything shabby about his life. He tried to avoid her eyes, though she barely spared him a glance. The minister cleared his throat. "If we could return to the matter of—" Tam cut him off. "We'll return when the police give us reason. Right now, we have none." The younger crofter muttered something about Angus hiding more than sheep. An older woman in the back row hissed at him to shut up. Tourists at the side whispered nervously, probably wishing they had picked a nicer village with fewer corpses. Hamish rose again, feeling lugs shuffle uneasily below him. If anyone saw Sinclair the night before he died, now is the time to speak up. Silence. Not polite silence. Punishing silence. The kind Lochdu used when it wanted to keep a man in his place. A few women stared at their laps as though they'd found something fascinating on their knitting bags. One tourist coughed. A crofter scratched his neck. No one spoke. Hamish swallowed. Right. The meeting limped on, though nothing useful was said. People stood only to accuse or defend, never to offer information. Sinclair had been seen by everyone except the people who mattered. Subsidies were mentioned only as weapons. Every time Hamish tried to direct the discussion back to the murder, the room shifted, slipping away from him like wet rope. At the end, as folk gathered their coats, Priscilla appeared at his elbow. Her voice was low, almost private, though Hamish knew half the room was listening. "You must keep this quiet, Sergeant," she said. "We cannot afford Lochdu becoming known for murder." Hamish stiffened. "It's already known." She gave him a cool, pained look. "Then control the damage." "I'm trying," he said. "I can see that," she replied, which somehow made it worse. She moved away before he could say anything else. She didn't look back. Outside, the rain had turned thin and cold. Hamish buttoned his coat. Luggs shook himself and sneezed. Two women hurried past, huddled under one umbrella. They didn't see Hamish at first. "I'm not telling the police a thing till I ken which side he's on," one whispered. "Aye," the other said. "He can change stories quick as Blair can shout." They saw him then and offered stiff smiles. "Evening, Sergeant." "Evening," Hamish said. They scuttled off like hens avoiding a fox. Hamish stood there for a long moment, listening to the rain tapping the kirk steps. The hall behind him buzzed with leftover mutters. The whole village had closed ranks, but not around him, never around him. He gave Luggs a gentle pat and started toward the station, feeling the quiet settle around him like another accusation waiting for dawn. The next morning, Hamish knew the day was going wrong the moment the hotel rang. Priscilla never phoned unless something was already in motion, and her voice on the line had been polite in that stiff way that meant she would not tolerate delay. So he trudged up the drive to the Tommel Castle Hotel, feeling Luggs dragging at the lead as if he, too, sensed the place would offer no kindness. Inside, the hotel hummed with the soft buzz of English walkers pretending not to gossip. They always looked as though they pitied Lochdu for being untidy and pitied themselves for choosing it. A pair of bird-watchers glanced at Hamish and then spoke quickly to each other, their binoculars swinging like accusations. Priscilla was in the lounge by the window, standing very straight, as if the whole building were leaning and she alone could keep it upright. She didn't greet him. She only turned her head slightly. "We had Mr. Sinclair here," she said. "He argued with one of your crofters in the bar." Hamish waited. Priscilla disliked repeating herself. She held out the visitor's book and a bar chit. Her nails were immaculate, of course. "He was drinking with Donald Campbell, you know him." Hamish did. Donald farmed the croft next to Angus and resented Angus for having better grazing, better water, and better everything. Donald resented quietly, which made it worse. "You see the problem," Priscilla said. Hamish stiffened. "The problem is Blair dragging folk off in cuffs before he thinks." Priscilla's mouth tightened. "The press will be sniffing soon. If you let the wrong story settle, Sergeant, this place will turn into a circus." Hamish felt his ears go hot. That always happened around her. Luggs nudged his knee as if warning him not to rise to it. "I'll speak to Donald," he said. "I would," Priscilla replied, "before Blair does." Donald Campbell's kitchen was painfully neat, as if the man scrubbed it whenever his temper rose. He sat ramrod straight, hands clasped on the table. His wife, Morag, hovered at the stove, a small bird of a woman who looked as though loud sounds might break her. Donald didn't wait to be asked. I argued with Sinclair. He started it. What about? Hamish asked. Land, Donald snapped. What else? He said I'd be better off selling out and moving to a wee house in Inverness like some pensioner. Morag dropped a fork. It clattered loudly in the quiet room. Donald glared at her before turning back to Hamish. I never touched him. He was drunk as a lord when he staggered out. I left him in the car park, alive. Hamish studied him. Donald looked frightened, which meant he might be telling the truth or lying extremely badly. Either way, Hamish didn't trust the neatness of it. Did you see him again that night? Hamish asked Morag. Morag shook her head so fast it was almost a flinch. No, Sergeant, not after the car park. Her voice wobbled on the last word. Something about it irritated Hamish. A lie was sometimes more tiring to hear than the truth. You ken the Tattie shed? Hamish asked. Morag went white. It was only for a second, but it was enough. I dinna go near Angus's croft, she said sharply. I didna say Angus, Hamish remarked, though he had. She looked ready to faint. Donald's chair scraped as he stood. Are we suspects now, Sergeant? Is that what you're hinting? Hamish raised a pacifying hand. No at all. Just gathering facts. Neither believed him. He left before the atmosphere thickened into shouting. Lugs practically ran out the door, glad to escape. Outside, the air was sharp. Hamish started down the path, trying not to think anything helpful. He was halfway to Loch Dhu when Priscilla appeared again, matching his stride for a moment. It always unsettled him when she walked beside him. She made him feel like a messy schoolboy. You backed Angus too quickly, she said quietly. Hamish felt heat rise in his face again. He's not a killer. You don't know that, she replied. You're sentimental. It clouds you. Hamish tried to think of something sharp to say, but nothing came. Priscilla gave him a polite, distant look and continued toward the hotel. Lugs gave a small huff of sympathy or annoyance. Hamish couldn't tell. At the hotel's rear steps, a man in overalls was repairing a broken latch. He glanced at Hamish. Sergeant, you'll be wanting to ken something. Hamish stopped. Aye. That Sinclair fellow, the handyman said. Folks say he argued with Donald, but that's not who I saw him with last. Hamish frowned. Who then? A woman, the man said, lowering his voice as though gossip might escape and bite him. Well dressed. Dressed smart, not in crofter gear. Wearing a blue scarf. They were having a right stooshy by the side door. Hamish felt a small jolt in his stomach. You saw her face? The handyman shook his head. Too dark, but she was nae crofter, not with clothes like that. Hamish felt the bit of torn blue cloth in his pocket, suddenly heavy. It had been caught on a nail at the Tattie shed. Now it sat there like a cold finger pointing the wrong way. You sure? Hamish asked. As sure as I am standing, the handyman said, and she was the angry one. Hamish thanked him and walked away, though he was no longer walking properly, more stumbling in long strides that made Lugs keep trotting to catch up. A woman in a blue scarf arguing with Sinclair. A bit of blue scarf torn at the shed. Donald's story suddenly too tidy. Morag's panic too sharp. He had allowed Blair to barrel ahead with the Angus theory because it had been the easiest story in the room, and now the ground beneath that story was shifting. He reached the road, stopped, and looked back at the grey outline of the hotel against the slope. Loch Dhu lay quiet below, but not the kind of quiet he liked. This was the tight kind, the kind that warned him things were slipping out of his hands. Lugs nudged him again, as if asking what they were supposed to do now. Hamish had no answer, only the scarf in his pocket and the uncomfortable sense that he would regret the next step, whichever way he took it. Before dawn, Hamish woke to frantic knocking and a roar that did not belong in the quiet of Loch Dhu. For a second he thought it was a nightmare. Then Lugs leapt off the bed, barking at the window. The knocking came again, harder. Hamish dragged on trousers and opened the door to find young Rory McPhee, white-faced and useless. Fire, he gasped. At Angus's place. Hamish didn't wait for more. The sky beyond the croft line glowed a fierce orange, far too bright for anything good. He grabbed his coat and ran, Lugs streaking ahead. The wind out of the hills was raw enough to slice through cloth and skin. Smoke billowed above the Tattie shed, thick and oily. By the time Hamish reached the yard, half the village was already there. Buckets moved in a frantic chain from the burn, though most of the water sloshed onto boots and curses. Flames licked up the old shed timber, spitting sparks toward the byre roof. Someone shouted for a ladder. Someone else shouted they didn't have one. Tam Fraser, red-faced and sweating, bellowed over the din. "Somebody poured paraffin on it. It went up like paper. I could smell the stuff from the gate." Hamish joined the bucket line, coughing as smoke clawed at his throat. The heat slapped him each time he approached the shed. Lugs whined and pulled toward the back wall, nose low, as if trying to reach the exact place where the body had been found. Hamish yanked him back. The dog was daft but loyal. At last the flames began to sag, dying in angry hisses. The shed was little more than a black skeleton. The air reeked of charred timber and something else Hamish didn't want to name. Folk stepped back, muttering. Anger simmered in the crowd. Anger at Blair, at Angus, at fate itself. Hamish walked around the back of the shed, boots squelching in the wet grass. There, barely visible in the shadows, a figure stumbled away across the field, coat flapping like a torn sail. "Hey!" Hamish shouted. The figure lurched faster. Hamish took off after them, nearly losing his footing twice on the churned mud. He caught up at the dry stone dyke, grabbing a sleeve. The person whirled, swinging something heavy. He ducked. The tin glanced off his ear. When he stood, Morag Campbell was slumped against the dyke, hair wild, tears streaking dirty cheeks. An empty paraffin tin dangled from her hand. "Morag," Hamish said, breathing hard. "What in God's name?" "You should have let them take Angus," she said. Her voice was flat, hollow. "If they'd taken him, it would have been done." Hamish stared. "You set a fire. You could have killed half the croft." She didn't answer. Her eyes had the glazed, stubborn look of someone who had decided her own misery was the truth and everyone else was wrong. She pushed past him and trudged back toward the village without waiting for permission. Hamish let her go. Dragging her back in front of the others would solve nothing. Besides, he needed to see what remained of the shed before Blair arrived and ruined everything. He returned to the ruins. The villagers stood in damp clusters, whispering. Someone muttered that Angus must have told Morag something. Someone else said Morag had always been odd. Gossip bloomed faster than flames. Lugs sniffed near the edge of the burnt planks, tail uncertain, ears tense. The place felt wrong even now. Hamish crouched, brushing aside ash with the back of his sleeve. Bits of charred wood, a melted hinge, and something white caught his eye. He picked it up carefully, a softened, warped shard of plastic. On one side, faint but recognizable, was part of a printed crest, the kind sold in tourist shops, a cheap souvenir key fob. Nothing Morag would carry, certainly nothing she would afford. He slipped it into his pocket. Of course Blair chose that exact moment to arrive. His car screeched into the yard, spraying mud onto Tam Fraser's boots. Blair climbed out like a man descending on a colony of ants. "Well, well, Macbeth," he said loudly, surveying the ruins. "Convenient, is it not? All the evidence nice and burned for you." Hamish stood. The villagers fought the fire as fast as they could. "And you," Blair snarled, stepping closer, "should have been guarding the scene instead of sleeping your way through the case." Hamish felt the heat rise in his chest. "A shed caught fire, Blair. I didn't control the weather or the idiots with paraffin." "Or the idiots in the polis," Blair shot back. "Arson to hide bloodstains, clear as daylight. Angus is looking guiltier by the minute." Tam overheard that and slammed his bucket down. Angus was nowhere near this place tonight. Blair ignored him. He enjoyed ignoring villagers. Hamish's jumper reeked of smoke. His eyes stung. He could have snapped back with something reckless. Instead, he said nothing. Blair smirked, mistaking silence for weakness. "Strathbane will take this over fully," Blair said. "Try not to lose anything else, Macbeth." He stalked off to bark orders at Anderson, who fumbled everything as usual. Hamish turned away. The ruined shed was still hissing faintly, sending up thin threads of smoke that stung the air. The villagers began drifting off. A few cast glances at Hamish, not friendly ones. He didn't blame them. Lochdu liked its disasters orderly, and this one had grown messy. Lugs nudged his leg again, wanting to leave. Hamish rubbed the dog's head. His sleeve left a smear of ash on Lugs's fur. The shard of plastic in his pocket felt heavier with each breath. Someone else had been here with Morag, or before her. Someone who owned a fob like that. Someone who wanted the Tattie shed gone. The fire had smothered the last of the physical evidence, but it had also exposed the village's panic. And panic always hid something worth finding. Hamish looked out across the dark fields, listening to the hiss of cooling timbers and the far-off chatter of villagers retreating. The night felt colder now, and not because of the wind. He reached down and gave Lugs another pat. "Come on, boy," he muttered. "This is only getting worse." Later that day, Hamish knew something was wrong the moment he pushed open Patel's shop door. It wasn't the usual fuss of customers arguing over prices or asking for change. It was the silence, heavy and waiting, followed by a sudden explosion of whispers, like hens startled into clucking. Patel stood behind the counter, stiff as a broom handle. Even his spectacles seemed tense. Lugs pressed close to Hamish's leg, uneasy. "I only need tea bags," Hamish said. No one budged. Then a woman near the biscuits cleared her throat loudly, as if announcing something holy. "I heard," she began, "that Rory Sinclair had a fancy woman in the village." "Aye," another said, "and they were meeting in Angus MacLean's tatty shed." She looked as though she enjoyed delivering the scandal more than believing it. "Meeting for what?" Hamish asked. Both women straightened, offended at being questioned. "You ken what," the first replied. "Somebody saw them slipping round the back of the Kirk Hall. That's what I heard." "And who was them?" Hamish pressed. The story shifted instantly. "Miss McPhee," said one. No, said the other. "It was Mrs. Duff at the post office, or maybe that posh lady from the hotel, the one with the tweed suits." "Priscilla?" Hamish said, incredulous. They both shrugged in a smug, unhelpful way that meant they'd say anything rather than admit ignorance. Patel gave Hamish a grim look. "You have let this get out of hand, Sergeant." Hamish bristled. "I'm doing my job." "Then do it more quietly," Patel murmured. "Folk are talking as if Loch Dhu were a place without honour." Hamish bought his tea bags and left, feeling the weight of the villagers' eyes on his back. Outside, he stood a moment, annoyed at himself for letting their foolishness get under his skin. But he could not shake the rumour about Miss McPhee. Prim women irritated him more than they should. He went to the school during the lunch break. Miss McPhee was supervising children as they chased a ball with all the grace of startled goats. She came over when she saw him, smoothing her skirt, nervous but determined. "What can I do for you, Sergeant Macbeth?" she asked, polite yet wary. Hamish folded his arms. "Folk say you knew Rory Sinclair, that you might have met him near the Kirk Hall." Her face went scarlet. "I beg your pardon?" "You'd best tell me if you knew him," Hamish said. His tone came out sharper than he intended, but he didn't soften it. "I have never entertained men in tatty sheds," she cried. The children stopped their playing, staring with bright, eager eyes. Miss McPhee noticed and clamped her mouth shut, trembling. Hamish muttered something noncommittal and left. It was only halfway down the path that he realised he had made a mistake, a big one. And by the time afternoon came, the whole village had embroidered the story into a full tapestry. Miss McPhee and Sinclair, sneaking about like a pair of lovesick teenagers. Sure enough, she stormed into the station just after 4, shaking so hard she could barely keep hold of her handbag. "You've blackened my name," she said, voice quavering with rage. "Folk are saying I had that man for company. There's parents who won't send their weans to school now because of your mouth." Hamish felt a flush creep up his neck. "I didn't mean." "You never mean," she snapped. "You just say, and we suffer." She marched out again, slamming the door harder than seemed possible for such a small woman. Lugs flinched under the desk. Hamish sat down heavily. For all his training and police instinct, he had fallen for gossip like a complete fool. Blair would laugh himself sick if he heard of it. Worse, the villagers now saw Hamish not as the quiet protector he tried to be, but as another source of harm. He rubbed his forehead. Maybe he should apologise, but apologising to Miss McPhee was like feeding a goat. It only encouraged it. As he brooded, the station door squeaked open again. This time it was old Mrs. Henderson, who always moved as if afraid she might break something fragile. She clutched a small parcel in her arms. "Sergeant," she said softly, "I dinna like to intrude, but I thought you should ken something." Hamish braced himself. More gossip, no doubt. "I was at the post office last week," she said. "I saw Mrs. Duff slip a letter into her handbag instead of the outgoing tray. It had Rory Sinclair's name on it." She hesitated. "Maybe she meant to post it later, or maybe she didna." Hamish straightened. "You're sure of the name?" "Aye, I remember thinking it was a strange person for her to be writing to. She's not one for pen pals." Hamish thanked her and walked her to the door. She left with the air of someone who had deposited a burden on his steps and was relieved not to carry it any more. After she was gone, Hamish looked down at Luggs. "So, Mrs. Duff's hiding letters now," he muttered. "Just what I need." Luggs thumped his tail once, uncertain. Hamish sighed. Loch Dhu had always loved a scandal, but this time the rumours weren't only distracting, they were pushing him in the wrong direction and leaving damage behind. And somewhere in the noise, hidden by all the foolish talk, was a truth he still hadn't grasped. He set his jaw, pulled the melted key fob shard from his pocket, and placed it on the desk beside him. It glinted faintly in the afternoon light, mocking him. The village would keep spinning its stories. It was up to him to find the one that mattered. Hamish had barely stepped onto the hotel drive when Priscilla appeared from behind a clipped hedge like a schoolmistress catching a boy with a catapult. Her expression was tight enough to crack. "Your interrogation of the schoolteacher is the talk of the breakfast room," she said. "We have English guests threatening to leave. They say they didn't come for real-life murders." Hamish winced. "I only asked her a question." "You asked it loudly," Priscilla replied, her tone like cold water. She didn't wait for him to answer, but took his sleeve and steered him toward the hotel lounge. Luggs followed, tail stiff. He disliked the hotel. Too much polish and too many smells pretending to be flowers. Inside, the lounge was overwarm. A thin man in an expensive anorak sat in a deep armchair, binoculars around his neck. He looked as if he had been poured into his clothes and resented every drop. "Sergeant Macbeth," Priscilla said crisply, "this gentleman wishes to speak to you." The man stood with a kind of jerky precision. "Julian Marsh," he said, "Edinburgh, solicitor." Hamish nodded. Marsh eyed him as though assessing whether Hamish would ever understand anything that might leave his mouth. He produced a folded newspaper clipping from his pocket, though Hamish wasn't sure why. The man looked ready to use props for pleasure. "May I see the photograph of the deceased?" Marsh asked. Hamish showed him the small wallet photo of Rory Sinclair. Marsh's face tightened. "I know him, or rather, I know what he is." Hamish waited. "That man tried to shake down one of my clients," Marsh said, lowering his voice as if the potted palms might gossip. "He had a sideline, digging up awkward financial details and hinting he might pass them on to authorities. He called it consultancy." Hamish felt a prickle of interest. "He blackmailed folk?" "Oh, he never used the word," Marsh said, "but the principle is the same. He once mentioned a sweet little Highland village where everyone lives on subsidies. He said he'd make a fortune there." Hamish's stomach sank. Loch Dhu was full of subsidies like a pudding was full of raisins. Marsh continued. "He showed me a letter. Proudly, the fool. Said a post office woman had been giving him figures." Marsh sniffed. "He didn't tell me her name." Hamish thought immediately of Mrs. Duff and the letter, hidden in her handbag. The ground shifted under him again. If Sinclair had been collecting secrets, no wonder half Loch Dhu had reason to wish him dead. Before Hamish could question Marsh further, the door burst open. Blair thundered in, Anderson at his heel like an obedient terrier. Blair wore the expression of a man who had already decided he was bored. "What's this, then?" Blair demanded. "Another one of your village storytellers?" Priscilla stiffened. Marsh raised an eyebrow. Hamish tried to intervene. "Mr. Marsh has information about Sinclair." Blair cut him off. "Look at you, Macbeth, grubbing around for fairy tales. And this man here," he jabbed a finger toward Marsh, "is wasting our time." Marsh bristled. "I am not wasting anyone's time. Your victim was a blackmailer." Blair chuckled cruelly. "Oh, aye? So all your village pets will have to pay back what they've fiddled. You'll be short a choir at the kirk, Macbeth, maybe even short a minister." Luggs emitted a low growl. Blair ignored it. Marsh set his jaw. "I have no obligation to help you, Sergeant Blair, but I will help Sergeant Macbeth, as he at least listens." Blair rolled his eyes. "Oh, Macbeth listens, that's all he does. Listening isn't solving murders." Hamish felt heat creep up his neck but said nothing. Blair enjoyed humiliation too much to give him the satisfaction of reacting. Priscilla cut in with chilly authority. "If you're finished disturbing my guests, Sergeant Blair, perhaps allow Mr. Marsh to continue." Blair snorted but stepped back, muttering something about spoiled hotels and soft policemen. Marsh resumed, visibly sharper. "I am telling you, Sinclair was dangerous. Not physically, legally. He could ruin people with a phone call." Hamish imagined Mrs. Duff's trembling hands, Donald Campbell's shame, Morag's frightened stare, the whole village tied up in quiet sins Sinclair might have picked apart. How many folk would he have approached? Hamish asked, mostly to himself. Marsh shrugged. As many as he could find. He was greedy. Hamish thanked Marsh and stepped outside with lugs. The air felt too clean compared to the mess of stories inside. Down on the loch shore, tourists were scanning the water through enormous telescopes, whispering excitedly about some rare bird. Their piece looked ridiculous beside everything churning in Loch Dhu. A 4x4 rolled past on the road, its windows tinted just enough that Hamish couldn't see the driver. Lugs bristled, tail rigid, a soft rumble in his throat. Hamish watched the vehicle until it turned out of sight. Something in the way it slowed, just slightly, made him uneasy. But unease seemed to be all he had these days. The pieces now pointed in dark directions. If Sinclair had come to shake down villagers, any one of them might have lured him behind the Tattie shed, and any one of them might have panicked enough to hit him. Blair would tear apart Loch Dhu if he learned about the letters. But hiding evidence from Strathbane could cost Hamish his job, his freedom even. He rubbed Lugs's head, though the dog didn't relax. Neither did he. Loch Dhu looked peaceful, the loch glinting softly in the thin light. But that was the trouble with the place. It always looked peaceful while quietly sharpening its knives. Hamish stood there, weighing what to do next, and found no answer that wouldn't do more harm. The next day, Hamish knew the day was going wrong before he even opened the station door. A heap of paperwork had collapsed off the desk in the night, scattering forms like dead moths across the floor. Lugs nosed one, sneezed, and retreated under the table. The smell of smoke still clung to Hamish's jumper, and even the kettle seemed to take offence, refusing to boil properly. He bent to gather the papers, muttering at the idiocy of a world that demanded forms instead of sense. He had barely stacked them again when the phone shrilled, sharp, official, and unfriendly. Superintendent Daviot's clipped voice came down the line like a scolding ruler. Macbeth, at last. Hamish straightened automatically. "Sir?" "You are letting this run away from you," Daviot said. "A murder, a fire, and now rumours of blackmail. The press is already sniffing. Strathbane must be seen to act, whether or not Loch Dhu can manage it." Hamish felt his stomach drop. "I've been following up leads. Increasingly irrelevant leads," Daviot snapped. "This is a simple rural killing, or it ought to be. Instead, it appears the Loch Dhu station cannot manage even that." Hamish heard voices behind Daviot, familiar ones. Blair's thick growl, Anderson's eager responses. Daviot spoke to them without covering the receiver. "Sergeant Blair, you will take operational charge." Blair's delighted laugh hit Hamish's ear like a slap. Then Blair's voice boomed directly into the phone. "Macbeth, Angus MacLean is to be charged formally. Murder and arson, destroying evidence you can." Hamish gripped the receiver harder. "You can't tie the fire to Angus. I caught Morag Campbell with a paraffin tin in her hand." Blair talked over him. "Morag Campbell admitted nothing useful, and Angus had motive. You're too soft on your village friends." Hamish swallowed anger. "Sir," he said to Daviot, forcing calm, "the doctor's latest report says Sinclair died earlier than we thought. He was hit on the head, but he lingered. He could have been moved by anyone with a barrow before dying in the shed. Angus being in Inverness doesn't clear him, but it doesn't damn him either." "Those details," Daviot said coolly, "are for the trial. What matters is that Strathbane is acting decisively." The line went dead. Hamish lowered the phone slowly. Lugs crept out from under the table, ears back. Outside, raised voices echoed in the lane. Hamish stepped out just in time to see Blair's car, lights flashing absurdly in broad daylight. Anderson stood proudly beside Angus MacLean, who was handcuffed again, red with humiliation and fury. Mary rushed forward, apron flapping. "No, not again!" She rounded on Hamish with sudden wild force. "You let them! You could have stopped this!" Hamish opened his mouth, but she wasn't finished. "You're supposed to protect us. Instead, you stand there letting that brute take my husband." Blair smirked as Angus was shoved into the car. "Villagers relying on Macbeth," he said loudly. "That's your first mistake." The door slammed. The car sped off in a spray of gravel. Mary turned away without another word. The watching villagers offered her no comfort. They only murmured to each other, glancing at Hamish with the weary disappointment people reserve for someone who had failed them in a way they would never forgive. Hamish went back inside, heart thudding like something had come loose. He told himself he had done all he could, but he heard his own lie clearly. He hadn't pushed hard. He hadn't challenged Blair when it mattered. And worst of all, he'd wasted time chasing foolish gossip because it was easier than staring down the truth. He dropped into his chair and opened the doctor's report again. The papers smelled faintly of disinfectant. He read slowly, carefully this time, forcing himself not to skip the dull parts. Traces of fertilizer on Sinclair's clothing. Hamish frowned. He checked Angus's recorded fertilizer type. Different, not even close. He flipped a page. Donald Campbell's fields used a distinct mixture, a cost-cutting brand Patel ordered in bulk. Hamish remembered Donald's neat croft, the polished table, the way Morag's hands had trembled. The fertilizer trace wasn't gossip, not rumour. It was a real link, a piece of evidence that didn't fit Blair's neat village killer story. Hamish leaned back, staring at the ceiling. To bring this forward meant undermining Blair's entire case, and Davitt would see that as disobedience, possibly grounds to declare Lochdew Station inefficient and close it. But to bury it, he couldn't stomach that either. Lugs whined softly, sensing the tension but clueless as ever. Hamish set the report down. The room felt colder. Even the ticking of the station clock seemed to accuse him of hesitation. He was trapped between two choices, both dangerous. Outside, Lochdew went about its day, pretending murder was an inconvenience rather than a reckoning. Hamish closed his eyes for a moment, knowing the next step would change everything, whether he chose it or not. The storm began before noon, a sudden squall blowing in from the loch and slapping rain hard against the station windows. Hamish was already soaked by the time he reached the Kirk Hall. He had been summoned, no explanation given, by Councillor Forbes, who always looked worried even on sunny days. Now he looked half-drowned. Inside, the hall smelled of wet wool and resentment. The agricultural official, a pale, twitchy man with a briefcase clutched like a shield, stood at the front. Beside him, Forbes wrung his hands as if hoping something might fall out that would save him. "We are here," Forbes began, voice wobbling, "to clear up misunderstandings. There is talk of subsidy audits and administrative irregularities." This earned an immediate snort from Tam Fraser. "Administrative? You mean you're treating us like criminals?" "No one is suggesting that," said the official, blinking rapidly. "Only that recent situations have created an unfortunate impression." Hamish stayed by the wall, dripping steadily. He could feel eyes turning toward him with that familiar mixture of suspicion and blame. Lugs huddled at his feet, ears back. "A murder," Tam said, jabbing a finger in the air. "And now ye lot want to pore through our paperwork because a dead stranger said something. It's an outrage. I filled in my form, same as always. Maybe one line was off, but you'd think I'd sold the Kirk roof." A crofter's wife, known for her sharp tongue, snapped back. "If certain folk hadn't been fiddling a bit more than one line, there'd be nae reason for audits." Her husband shushed her, though not before half the room heard. The argument that followed rose like smoke. Old disputes about fences, water rights, machinery borrowed and never returned. It didn't take much to turn Lochdew into a kettle with the lid rattling. The official tried again. "We simply need to ensure compliance. These matters are routine." "Routine?" yelled Tam. "Aye. Next you'll tell us the murder is routine." Murmurs spread. Someone muttered, "If Macbeth had handled it right, the government wouldn't be sniffing about." Hamish felt the words hit him like hailstones. He kept his arms folded and his face still. Losing his temper would only prove half the room's point. Then Priscilla stepped forward, all elegance and tight composure. "If these rumours continue," she said, "the hotel will suffer. We've already had 2 cancellations. If tourists lose confidence, staff will have to go." That did it. Every head swung toward Hamish. It was absurd. He had not invited Sinclair to be murdered, nor asked for a fire. But Lochdew preferred neat culprits. Councillor Forbes cleared his throat nervously. "Let us remain civil." "Civil?" someone barked. "Tell that to the policeman there, letting Strathbane drag folk off like sheep for market." Hamish shut his eyes briefly. He deserved some of it. Not all, but enough. The hall continued its slow boil until finally the official closed his briefcase, signalling defeat. "We will return," he said grimly, "with proper auditors." The entire room groaned. When people began filing out, Hamish slipped into the corridor, glad to escape the heat of their stares. He was about to leave when he heard voices behind the thin door near the vestry. The agricultural official said, "If Loch Dhu gets a reputation for fraud and murder, funding for local schemes will vanish. We simply can't justify it to Edinburgh." "Cutbacks again," Forbes muttered. "We'll lose half our crofters. And that wee police station is a luxury we might not afford." The official's tone was matter-of-fact, as though discussing a broken bench rather than Hamish's job. Hamish stepped away before he heard more. He didn't want to stand there listening to people plan his absence like a tidying-up exercise. Outside, the rain lashed sideways, soaking him all over again within seconds. Lugs trotted close, growling whenever a shadow moved. Hamish didn't blame him. The whole village felt hostile, the way a house feels when the lights are out and someone has left a window open. As they walked past the notice board by the hall gate, a ragged corner of a flyer caught Hamish's eye. Most of the board was plastered with adverts for lost gloves, saileys, and fishing lessons. But these flyers were different. Battered, rain-stained, printed by some estate office. He tugged one free. Land use review underway, Sinclair and Partners, Estate Consulting. Reviewing holdings for the Strathmore estate, bordering the properties of D. Campbell. Crofter Hamish read it twice, the words sinking in like cold water down his back. Strathmore estate. Donald Campbell's boundary, not Angus's. Lugs whined, sensing the shift in Hamish's mood. Hamish looked toward Donald's croft across the grey fields. He remembered the neat kitchen, Morag's panic, and the fertiliser trace on Sinclair's clothes. Fertiliser that matched Donald's land, not Angus's. And the woman in the blue scarf, still unaccounted for. The Tattie shed at Angus's place began to seem almost too convenient. A place where a body could be moved easily. A place someone could burn without destroying their own evidence. Rain dripped from Hamish's hair into his collar. He folded the flyer and slid it into his pocket. Lugs gave another low growl as a shadowy figure hurried past them under a large umbrella. The figure did not greet Hamish. That alone was enough to raise suspicion. "Come on, boy," Hamish murmured, though his voice lacked conviction. "We're not done yet." The loch wind cut through him as he made his way back toward the station, the storm rattling signposts and lifting loose gravel. Somewhere behind him, the Kirk Hall door slammed like a final judgment. Loch Dhu had turned its back on him, and in the cold, hard rain, Hamish realised he was standing closer to the truth, but farther from the village than ever. Hamish knew something was wrong the moment he stepped into the post office. Mrs. Duff was too upright, too crisp. Her blouse starched within an inch of its life. She looked like a woman who had been expecting trouble and intended to meet it with good posture. Lugs nosed the wooden stand of greeting cards and sneezed as though the place offended him. "Well then," Mrs. Duff said, folding her hands, "no doubt you're here to arrest me next, Sergeant." Hamish kept his voice mild. "I'm only here to ask about a letter." Her nostrils flared. "I deliver letters. I don't write them." "Someone saw you put a letter addressed to Rory Sinclair into your handbag instead of the outgoing tray," Hamish said gently. "A week before he died." Mrs. Duff froze. It was the smallest tightening of the shoulders, the faintest flick of her eyes toward the side drawer, but Hamish saw it. He waited. Silence was sometimes more use than pressure. She blustered first, of course. "Folk make up all sorts of things. I'm a public servant. I have responsibilities." Hamish said nothing. At last she sighed sharply, like a kettle giving up. She fished out a key from her pocket, unlocked the side drawer with stiff fingers, and lifted out a small bundle of letters tied with string. She set them on the counter as if they burned. "They're all addressed to him," she muttered. "Sinclair, in Strathbane." Hamish untied the bundle. The envelopes were neat. Too neat. She had rewritten some of them, he suspected, to cover up older attempts. "He asked me to send him figures," she went on what folk were getting. Subsidies, grants, a shameful business. I did it once. It felt wrong. When he asked again, I kept the letters. I thought, if he couldn't approve anything, he'd go away. Hamish flicked through them slowly. Lugs pressed his chin on the counter, watching. Among them was a stamped envelope from Donald Campbell. Bold handwriting. Confidential, written across the front. Hamish's gut clenched. He opened it and skimmed enough to see the truth plain as day. Donald asking Sinclair to keep quiet about some overclaimed acreage in exchange for a private payment. No wonder Donald had looked ready to faint. Another letter caught Hamish's eye, a small folded note in a rounded feminine hand. We must talk where no one will see us, behind McLean's old Tattie shed. Hamish felt the air tighten. Who wrote this? Mrs. Duff flushed. Don't ask me. Half the women in Lochdu sign their name with an M. Margaret, Morag, Mary. Take your pick. That's not helpful. It's not meant to be, she snapped. Hamish read the note again. It felt wrong. Too intimate to be mere gossip, too vague to be business. Whoever wrote it had wanted real secrecy. Was Sinclair here the day before he died? Hamish asked. Mrs. Duff looked away. Aye, smirking like he owned the village, wanting more information. I pretended the system was down. He didn't argue? Oh, he argued, she said. He said if folk had nothing to hide, they'd not fear a simple review. Her lip curled. I told him if he didn't leave, I'd faint in front of him, and he'd have to explain it to the doctor. Hamish almost smiled. Almost. The door banged open. Blair stomped in, shaking rain from his coat like a wet bull terrier. Anderson followed, eager as a pup. What's this? Blair demanded. Private meetings in the post office? Macbeth harassing honest women now? Mrs. Duff stiffened. Panic flickered in her eyes. Before Hamish could say a word, she snatched the letters off the counter and shoved them back into the drawer. You're bullying a respectable woman, she declared loudly. I've done nothing wrong, Sergeant Macbeth. Blair smirked triumphantly. Hear that, Anderson? Macbeth's chasing we postmistresses instead of catching killers. Hamish felt heat rise in his face. Blair saw it and enjoyed himself. Run along now, Blair said in a false fatherly tone. Leave the proper work to Strathbane. Hamish turned away before he said something he'd regret. Lugs growled softly as they stepped outside, the damp air cooling Hamish's temper only a little. He had lost the letters, the real ones, but he had managed to slip one envelope into his coat pocket during Blair's blustering. Donald Campbell's incriminating message. Small comfort, but enough to keep the trail warm. As he walked back toward the station, the rain pattered harder. The village around him looked innocent enough, chimneys puffing, windows shut against the storm. But someone here had written a note arranging a secret meeting with Sinclair behind the Tattie shed. Someone who signed their name only with an M. Hamish tightened his grip on Lugs's lead. The dog whined, sensing the shift. Come on, boy, Hamish murmured. We're getting closer, and folk won't like it. Hamish knew something was wrong the moment Donald Campbell opened the door. The man's face had gone the colour of old milk, and that was before Hamish even showed him Donald Campbell's letter. Lugs gave a low, uneasy huff, as if he too sensed the sourness in the air. Hamish stepped inside the neat kitchen. It was too tidy, as though someone had scrubbed every surface to erase whatever they didn't want seen. I've something to ask you, Hamish said, laying the folded letter on the table. Donald stared at it as though it were a snake. Where did you— Never mind that, Donald swallowed. His hands shook slightly as he picked it up. I wrote it. So you overclaimed acreage? Donald's shoulders sagged. Once. Just once. I was desperate that winter. I thought no one would notice, and then Sinclair found out. He rubbed his forehead. He said he'd ruin me unless I paid him, but I never paid him. I told him I'd go to the authorities myself before I let him bleed me dry. Hamish watched him carefully. He didn't look like a killer. He looked like a man caught in his own stupidity. Where were you the night Sinclair died? Hamish asked. At the Kirk session meeting, Donald said quickly. Ask the minister. Oh, I will. The minister confirmed it. Donald had been there, and yes, he slipped out for half an hour. For what? Hamish asked when he returned to Donald. To walk off a temper, Donald muttered. I didn't want the whole session seeing me fly off the handle. Hamish stared at him. He was tired of the endless web of lies and half-truths, tired of villagers acting like startled hens, tired of Blair trampling everything he touched. What he wanted was one simple thing he could believe. You're a fool, Hamish said at last, but you're not a killer. Donald let out a shaky breath, relief softening his face. Morag, watching from the doorway with arms folded tight across her chest, did not look relieved. She looked furious. You believe him, but not me, she said quietly, voice rough with contempt. You'll see where that gets you. Before Hamish could reply, she turned and stalked back inside the croft. Lug's ears flattened. Later at the station, Hamish barely had time to sit before Blair strode in, triumphant as a rooster in a henyard. So, "The great Macbeth clears Donald Campbell," Blair sneered. "You'll be standing godfather at his fraud trial then, will you?" "He's not our man," Hamish said stubbornly. "He's frightened and stupid." But someone else hit Sinclair. Blair laughed. "Och, aye. Macbeth knows best. Always does. Until the press says otherwise." A couple of villagers waiting in the corridor heard the exchange. They exchanged glances. One muttered loudly enough, "He'll shield some folk till the cows come hame, but he let Angus burn." Hamish didn't answer. Arguing only fed them. By the time he returned to his lonely supper, a miserably overboiled egg and a heel of bread, his certainty had ebbed. The station felt damp and cramped. Lugs paced the room, restless, nails tapping on the wooden floor. Hamish pulled out the doctor's report again, though he knew it by heart now. Traces of fertilizer, distinct mixture, matches, Campbell's fields. He stared at the words. Cold seeped into his stomach. He had just publicly defended the only crofter whose fertilizer matched the traces on Sinclair's clothes. Not dramatically, not heroically, just a small, stupid misjudgment spoken aloud where Blair and half the village could witness it. He dropped his head into his hands. "Idiot," he muttered to himself. Lugs went to the door and scratched politely, tail ticking the air. "You dinna need a walk," Hamish snapped. Lugs whimpered softly and scratched again. Hamish scrubbed his face with both hands. All right, I'm coming." He grabbed his coat, speaking a weary apology to the dog under his breath. It was easier to apologize to Lugs than to people. Lugs at least didn't talk back or hold a grudge. But as they stepped out into the dark, cold air of Loch Dhu, Hamish felt the weight of what he'd done, or failed to do, settle heavier on his shoulders. He had trusted his gut instead of the evidence. He always had. But this time, it hadn't served him. And Loch Dhu, already bristling with anger and fear, would not forgive another mistake. Lugs had been pestering at the door since supper, pacing back and forth with the stubborn air of a creature who would not let Hamish rest until properly heard. Hamish snapped at him once, then felt mean about it, so he let the dog choose the route. It was late. The rain had softened to a thin mist, and the darkness pressed close about the fields. "Go on then," he muttered. "Pick your daft path." Lugs trotted ahead, nose low. Hamish followed, hands deep in his pockets, mind thick with the mistakes of the day. The dog led them past Angus's croft, where the blackened bones of the Tattie shed hunched in the gloom like an accusation, and on toward the old Tattie rigs, half fallow, half-forgotten strips of land that nobody admitted to owning, and everyone used when it suited them. Hamish was halfway through deciding the walk was pointless when Lugs stopped dead. The dog's tail stiffened, ears flat, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "What now?" Hamish asked, stepping closer. Lugs nosed a patch of earth where the soil was unnaturally smooth, freshly turned. There should have been nothing planted there this time of year. Hamish crouched, the cold damp seeping through his knees, and scraped at the soil with his hands. Within moments, metal glinted through the muck. He pulled harder, revealing a battered spade. The blade was stained, not freshly, but darkened in a way Hamish recognized too well. Someone had wiped it, hurriedly, not carefully. Off to the side, half buried, lay a brown brogue shoe. Expensive leather. Sinclair's missing one. "And what's this?" Hamish murmured. A scrap of cloth sagged from the dirt. He lifted it, a crushed blue scarf, muddy and creased. The same colour as the torn piece he kept tucked away at the station. He felt a cold, heavy certainty settle in his stomach. This wasn't a dumping ground. This was a hiding place. Someone had meant to come back. Someone foolish enough to think shallow earth on common land would keep secrets. Lugs sat back on his haunches, watching Hamish with solemn eyes, as though the dog had done something clever. Hamish ruffled his ears out of habit. "You're daft," he said quietly, "but you're handy at sniffing out trouble." The fertilizer smell in the soil was sharp and chemical. It matched the trace the doctor had found on Sinclair's clothes. Hamish straightened and looked over the sagging wire fence. Donald Campbell's croft lay beyond, neat rows and the familiar bags of discount fertilizer stacked by the shed. But this strip wasn't Donald's. It belonged to the church, or at least it had once. Over the years it had been passed around unofficially, the kind of land everyone borrowed and nobody admitted to using, which meant there would be lies ahead, more than usual. Hamish pulled out his old landline mobile, the sort that had to be bashed on the side to work at all, and rang the doctor. After several attempts, the doctor answered in his usual irritated tone. "What is it now, Macbeth? I've already told you the man died of a head injury." "I found a spade," Hamish said, "and Sinclair's shoe, and a scarf. You'd best have another look at the wound." There was grumbling, but the doctor agreed. After a short silence punctuated by paper shuffling, he said, "Aye, a spade could have done it. A heavy garden one swung hard. You have your murder weapon, if that's what you're fishing for." Hamish hung up, feeling no triumph. A spade fit nicely, too nicely, and the place it had been hidden made the mistake he'd made with Donald feel 10 times heavier. Back at Donald Campbell's kitchen, the man answered the door, looking ready to bolt. Hamish held out the scarf and the shoe. "Found in the Tattie rigs." Donald's face tightened, but he said nothing. "And fertilizer in the soil matches yours," Hamish added. "Funny that." Donald slumped into a chair. "I didn't do that," he said. "Those rigs aren't mine, Sergeant. Ask the Kirk who uses them." "Who does use them?" Hamish asked. Donald hesitated, then let out a bitter laugh. "Who gets the best tatties for the harvest festival every year?" Folk whisper, but no one says it aloud. "Ask your minister." Hamish blinked. The notion was absurd, but not impossible. Villagers hid things in plain sight all the time, especially when they felt entitled. "And the scarf?" Hamish asked. Donald shook his head. "No idea, but if someone wants to set me up, they're doing a fine job. First my letter, now this. You back me 1 minute, and the next you're waving evidence in my face." Hamish felt the sting of that, because it was true. He had defended Donald loudly, in front of Blair, in front of villagers who would repeat it 3 times before morning, and now he was standing in Donald's kitchen with half a confession and half a clue, neither of them enough to save face. Lugs pawed at the linoleum, impatient. Hamish left Donald's croft with more weight on his shoulders than when he'd entered. The night mist thickened as they walked. Lugs stopped again at the disturbed earth, sniffing it with the same uncomplicated certainty as before. Hamish crouched once more, the cold creeping through him. The spade, the scarf, the shoe, the fertilizer, pieces scattered across a small patch of land, as if someone had assumed the ground would swallow their guilt. "Maybe you're smarter than me," he said to Lugs. The dog wagged his tail once, pleased by the attention. Hamish stood, brushing soil from his hands. He felt unsettled, the way he did when the loch ran still before a storm. The obvious had been sitting beneath his feet, and he had wasted days backing the wrong man, maybe out of stubbornness, maybe out of tiredness, or maybe because Lochdu knew too well how to blind him. He looked down at Lugs again, sitting in the muck, waiting for direction. "Come on, boy," Hamish said quietly. "We'd better ask the Kirk who's been growing tatties on Holy Land." But the unease that gripped him did not ease with the decision. The truth had come up with the turned earth, and it wasn't done with him yet. The trouble began before Hamish reached the manse. The gate stood half open, swaying in a sluggish wind that carried the sour smell of damp stone. Someone had left in a hurry or arrived unwillingly. Either way, it was wrong, and Lugs pressed close to Hamish's leg as if he felt it too. Inside, the lights were on but dim, giving the hallway a sickly look. The minister appeared at once, pale, and with that nervous fluttering of the hands he usually hid behind a Bible. "Sergeant Macbeth," he said, far too formally for a man who had once borrowed Hamish's lawnmower without asking. "You'd better come through." Hamish followed him to the study. Books leaned on one another as though exhausted, and a fire that should have warmed the room crackled weakly, more smoke than heat. The minister sat, then stood again, then hovered, finally blurting, "I knew you'd come about the land." Hamish raised an eyebrow. "Aye, the rigs." The minister swallowed. The church, informally, allowed certain parishioners to use the extra strips. It kept folk friendly. Our attendance hasn't been what it was. We thought it would help. "Who used them?" The minister looked at the carpet as though the pattern might save him. "Mrs. Duff had a strip. My cousin had another. And Morag Campbell." He winced as he said her name. "She said she needed it. I didn't ask why." Hamish felt the tug of an old irritation. Everything in Lochdu ran on favours and silence. "Morag's note had only an M," he said. "It fits." "It does," the minister whispered. "But I don't think she meant harm. She came to me once, near tears, said men from outside were poking about and she feared losing everything." Hamish nodded slowly, though something in it scraped the wrong way. Morag's fear was real enough, but fear didn't explain the battered spade dug out of the earth. "Let me see your Kirk accounts," he said. The minister blinked. "This is hardly the time." "It's exactly the time." After a moment of fluttering hesitation, he fetched a ledger from the desk drawer. Neat handwriting, tight columns, no smudges. Hamish traced the dates with a finger. "What's this? Donations from anonymous benefactors?" The minister looked ready to faint. "They started just after Mr. Sinclair arrived. Folk can give quietly if they wish." "Aye, but they usually don't." Hamish tapped the inked numbers. "Looks like steady payments. Small, but regular. Anyone could think they were paying someone off." The minister's face went grey. "If you're suggesting blackmail money touched the Kirk, I'm suggesting you tell me who handles the accounts." "Mrs. Duff," he whispered. "She has for years." Hamish felt a tightening across his shoulders. Of course it was her, standing starched and prim behind her counter while hiding half the village's secrets in drawers. He told the minister to send for her at once. Mrs. Duff arrived minutes later, storming into the study, still wearing her postmistress's coat as if she'd run the whole way. "This is an outrage," she declared. "I'm a respectable woman, and I'll not have my name pulled through the mud because of a dead troublemaker." Hamish held up the ledger. "You're the treasurer. Explain the donations." Her chin went up. "I will not explain generosity." He placed the crushed blue scarf on the desk beside the ledger. "And explain this. It was found hidden with Sinclair's shoe." She flinched, only for a heartbeat, but he saw it. "I arranged the meeting," she said, every word hard as a nail. "Aye, I did. At the Tattie shed. I meant to tell him I'd burn every letter he had and he could take his wickedness elsewhere. I never touched a penny. I took the letters because folk were afraid. It was me who tried to protect them, not ruin them." "Well, when did you leave him?" "He was alive," she snapped. "Alive and shouting. I walked away before I did something I'd regret." Hamish leaned back. "Who else knew of the meeting?" "I told no one," she said, which meant she was lying. Someone always told someone in Lochdu. The whole village ran on whispered half-truths disguised as confidences. A sudden gust rattled the windows. The minister jumped like a man expecting the roof to fall in. Hamish kept his voice steady. "Who else uses those rigs besides you? I want names." The minister wrung his hands. "You asked me earlier. I didn't tell you all. There's another. A Kirk elder. A man with considerable responsibility. He begged me not to list him. Said he'd be embarrassed." Hamish waited. The pause grew rank with dread. "Ewan Campbell," the minister said at last. "Donald's elder brother." Hamish felt the slow, heavy shift of something falling into place. Ewan, with his reputation for thrift, his pride, his short temper hiding under a gloss of piety. A man who had stayed carefully quiet through all of this. Mrs. Duff let out a sharp breath. "Ewan? Of course he'd be mixed up. That man's had debts for years, but pretends he's above it all." "Debts?" Hamish asked. "Everyone knows but him," she muttered. Hamish shut the ledger. He'd wasted time chasing Donald, reassuring himself Morag was harmless, dancing around half-truths. Ewan had kept himself out of reach, which should have been the first warning. He stepped out under the eaves of the manse. Lugs pressed forward, growling at something beyond the gate. A shadow moved, not running but moving quickly, head down, coat pulled close. Hamish called out. No answer. But the gate, broad-shouldered, stiff at the knee, was familiar. "Ewan," Hamish murmured to the dark. Lugs barked once, sharp and certain. Hamish stood still as the figure vanished round the bend. The night pressed in, the wind colder than before. He had been looking at the wrong Campbell all along, and the man knew it. He touched the damp scarf in his pocket and felt the unsettled truth breathing down the back of his neck. Hamish knew something was wrong the moment he stepped onto Ewan Campbell's yard. The place was too tidy. Ewan's sheds were usually untidy in the comfortable, careless way of a man who believed himself above tidy habits. Now the doors were shut, every tool hung straight, and even the mud seemed brushed out of the way. A man preparing for visitors, Hamish thought, or for trouble. Ewan himself appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a too-clean cloth. "Sergeant Macbeth," he said, smiling the sort of smile men wear when they hope to end a conversation before it starts. "If this is about my wee brother again, I've told everyone who's asked. It's no about Donald," Hamish said. "It's about you." The smile stiffened. "You've been listening to daft gossip." Hamish stepped past him into the kitchen. He wasn't invited, But Ewan did not dare make a scene. Lochdu elders liked to pretend to authority, but they folded quickly when firmness was applied. Lug settled just inside the door, ears tilted back, watching Ewan with the same steady distaste Hamish felt. Hamish set a scrap of blue scarf on the table, along with the copied letter and the doctor's amended note about the fertilizer. "Let's skip the daft gossip part," he said. "You've been using the rigs. You've been paying into the Kirk's secret accounts, and you knew Sinclair was meeting Mrs. Duff at the Tattie shed." Ewan blew out a long breath. "You're mixing things that have nothing to do with one another." "Then you won't mind explaining them." Ewan opened a cupboard, shut it again, opened another, as if a better excuse might be stored behind the tins of lentils. "Look," he said finally, turning with that bluff elder's calm. "I never met the man. Why would I bother with a greasy wee factor from Strathbane?" Hamish gave him a flat look. "Because he had letters. Because he was threatening men who make mistakes on forms." "Everyone makes mistakes," Ewan snapped. "Aye," Hamish said quietly, "but not everyone drags a body across half a field." The whole room went still. Even the clock on the wall seemed to tick louder. Ewan's jaw worked, then set. "You've no proof." "I've enough," Hamish answered. "The fertilizer on Sinclair's clothes didn't match Angus's land. It matched the rigs, and the rigs match the bags you keep stacked behind your shed. The doctor says the head wound fits a spade. I found one, buried with stains." Ewan's shoulders dropped like wet sacks. "I never meant—" He stopped, then began again, voice harder. "I went to meet him. Aye. He'd been pressing me for money. Not the small amount he asked Donald for, far more. He said he had figures showing I'd underdeclared land for years. Lies mostly, but close enough to the truth to hurt." "So you arranged to pay him off?" "I arranged to scare him off," Ewan corrected, as if it were a moral distinction. "He wanted sums I couldn't erase without folk noticing. He said he'd expose the whole Kirk if he had to." Ewan sat down heavily. "We argued. I gave him a shove. He fell. I panicked." Hamish waited. Ewan's eyes flicked up, a flash of anger under the misery. "I hit him once, with the spade, just once, to put the fear of God in him. But he went limp like a rag. I thought I'd killed him. Maybe I had. Maybe he was only stunned. I didn't look closely." He rubbed his forehead. "I dragged him to Angus's shed. Everyone already suspected Angus of something or other. It seemed tidy." Hamish said nothing. It wasn't tidy. It was the sort of selfish thinking men called practicality. Ewan went on, bitterness rising. "The fire was nothing to do with me. Morag set it. She thought burning the place would end the whispers. She had no idea what really happened." Hamish almost pitied him then. Almost. "You should have told someone. And have my name plastered across Strathbane? Have the Kirk shamed? Have my family dragged through it?" Ewan gave a short laugh. "Better a dead gossip than a ruined village." Hamish looked at him, feeling the old coldness settling in. "You ruined it yourself." Before Ewan could reply, tyres skidded in the yard. Blair entered without knocking, waddling in with triumph already written across his face. "Macbeth," he barked, "you taken up residence here? Daviot says this has gone on long enough. We're closing the case." Hamish didn't move. "Ewan's confessed." Blair froze for half a second, then sneered. "Of course he did, after my careful investigative pressure." "Your what?" Hamish asked mildly. Blair rounded on him. "Don't get clever. Daviot will hear that Strathbane cracked this, not your village tea parties. Anderson, get in here." Anderson appeared in the doorway, flustered and sweating as usual. "Take him," Blair ordered, jerking a thumb at Ewan. Ewan stood slowly, his face oddly calm now that the worst had finally happened. "You'll tell them I never meant," Hamish cut him off. "I'll tell them what you said." Blair smirked. "Aye, and then you'll write a report explaining how you let this circus run wild." Hamish didn't answer. He was too tired to argue with Blair, too tired to protect the village from what was coming. Anderson led Ewan outside, Blair stomping after them like a man parading a victory he barely understood. When they were gone, Hamish walked back toward Lochdu. The village looked the same. Smoke from chimneys, dogs barking, sea wind curling round the houses, but something in it had shifted. Quiet deals, quiet cheats, quiet guilt. All of it dragged into the light because one man panicked and another man hid. The days that followed were grim. Angus was released but would hardly look at Hamish. Miss McPhee crossed the street rather than past the station window. Mrs. Duff resigned from her treasurer's post and claimed she would attend a kirk where decency was still respected. The subsidy men came with clipboards, and folk muttered that Hamish had brought them. The village had wanted silence. Hamish had brought noise. Priscilla sought him out on the hotel path. Her tweed suit was immaculate, her expression unreadable. "Thank you," she said coolly, "for keeping the worst of it out of the papers." Then, after the faintest pause, "We may have to consider selling the hotel eventually. Tourists dislike uncertainty." Hamish nodded. "Aye." She went back inside without a goodbye. He returned to the station, lugs padding beside him. The dog shook himself by the stove and flopped down with a sigh as Hamish lit a peat fire. The kettle boiled slowly, wheezing. Hamish poured tea into his chipped mug and stood at the window. Loch Dhu stretched out beyond the glass, dark and still, as though pretending nothing had happened. But the village had shifted in ways he couldn't mend. He drank the tea, though it tasted as dull as the day. Outside, the loch wind nudged at the station door, like someone reminding him the story wasn't quite finished.